Welcome everyone to the 2020 APAC Groundbreakers Virtual Tour by Oracle UC. This year our event will be the biggest one ever done with 174 sessions, including normal sessions, workshops, and hands-on labs from 123 different speakers over 11 days. Also, it will cover sessions on 4 different languages. Please remember to register to as many sessions you can, and all sessions will be available to replay as many times you want for 2 weeks after the initial session date and time. You can also interact with the speaker at any time during that 2 weeks by posting questions or comments directly in the playback session page. I would like to say thank you to our Oracle user groups and Java user groups that made this event possible, and also to our sponsors, Oracle Groundbreakers and CloudDB. At today's session, Application UI Design in a Mobile Device World by Peter Koletzke. Hopefully I pronounce your last name properly, Peter.
Yes.
Please feel free to write questions at any time during the session by using the Q&A option on the Zoom webinar, and Peter will be answering them at the end of the session. If any issues that you need to contact me, Francisco, as the moderator, please use the chat option to contact me at any time. Now, without any more delays, I would like to leave you with this amazing session by Peter Koletzke. Peter, I will stop sharing my screen and you can start sharing yours now.
Okay.
By the way, will be a close to 60-minute session, just to let you guys know.
Okay, so you can see my screen now, yeah?
Yes, I can see your presentation properly.
Okay, yeah, it's just the title slide. All right, hello everyone. So I've been a developer for decades, and I noticed that things were changing quite a bit when we started moving into the mobile device world. And I did a kind of a study and did lots of research on different ways that people were using to design their systems. And so I put all this together into this presentation. And usually when you go to a class, you learn something and then you have a quiz to test you on your knowledge of the content. But I thought we'd start with a quiz this time. So if you would bear with me, I'm going to show a slide here, and let me see if you can tell me what this symbol means. And what about this one? Another one? One more? How about that one? And this one. Okay, so that's the quiz. Basically, what are those symbols? What do those symbols mean? Well, question is, how did you know that? I know everyone got an A+ because they all knew exactly what those symbols meant. So how in the world does everybody in the whole world know what those symbols mean? So what I'm going to do is kind of cast this in the context of Oracle development tools. And, I started kind of with the early days of Oracle development tools. So there was a dumb terminal, which was IAF, SQL Forms, and Developer Forms 6.0. We had green screen, and, sometimes it was amber, but it was, basically just text mode. And then we got client server, where we could do graphics, SQL Forms 4.0 and to 6.0. And we were doing client server with application running on the desktop. Applet in the browser, we had World Wide Web come in, so we said we have to run our application inside a browser. And so we had a Java application running, and we ran our forms basically the way we were running them before. It was exactly the same, but it was in a browser. Next, we had Light Client, which was before J2EE, Java 2 Enterprise Edition. And Oracle came up with this framework called UIX, which was kind of the precursor to Ajax. And the client was a little interactive. It wasn't just standard HTML, but we were getting a little bit of interactivity. And the design looked a little bit less like forms and more like HTML. Next step was Light Client, which was Java 2 Enterprise Edition, and afterwards, and then Ajax Web 2.0, where we had interactive forms that looked a lot like the Oracle forms we were running in client server, but they were on the web. So ADF Faces 10G to current version 12.2. So you're getting interactive components. The next step was we're using smart device to access our applications. And this would be something like JavaScript, JET, Max, VBCS, or MAF, Mobile Application Framework. So these are all the kind of more modern tools that Oracle's created to create applications. So I compared that kind of short history of development tools that Oracle's presented and put it in a chart. And then I came up with, well, here's the development tools, and this is kind of the display paradigm for those tools. And then I thought, well, we have to look at, try to compare graphics in each of these, data input, how data input was done, navigation, and then was there some user training or a lot of user training required? And then what is the display software in addition to the display paradigm? So I put all this together and I thought, well, yeah, this is really kind of an interesting comparison, but it's really hard to understand trends. So this is really not a very good mobile aware chart. You can't really get something visually quickly by reading this chart. You'd have to look through everything and kind of compare back and forth. So I said, let's do it in a graph. So I graphed the amount of things using these very precise measurements, none, a bit, some, more, and a lot. And then on the x-axis, I was doing the application techniques, the display device techniques. So everything I was just showing as far as the development tools are over time. So starting with character mode and going through mobile, this was kind of where we had key presses. In the beginning, it was all key presses, and then started to get less and less. And in mobile devices, we don't have as much. For training, it used to be that we had to have user training and maybe a week of user training to use our application. And then it got less and less over time. And then with a mobile device, you're hoping for no user training at all. Mouse, this was a very short period of time during the client server and web. No mouse in character mode, no mouse in mobile. And then graphics, of course, goes up over time. So we're seeing nothing, of course, in character mode. And then graphics came in with client server and it just kept getting bigger. Tap, swipe, and talk, of course, is only for mobile. Now, we did have ways to talk to computers before this, but it wasn't the norm. So mobile, this is kind of a normal thing. So if we put all these together, you'll see a lot of different lines, but when things change a lot, you'll see some a big difference in what's happening with each of these parameters. So the big change happened between character mode and client server, obviously, because we had mouse and graphics. And another one happened between light client and light client J2EE plus, pre J2E and then J2E and afterwards with Ajax. It was a big change in some of these things, but it wasn't as big as the other one in the beginning. And then the biggest changes happen now between light client and mobile devices. So pretty much everything changed. So this is kind of trying to drive the point home about why we're talking about this and why it's important. So foundation in mobile design is that there's as many mobile devices or more mobile devices than there are people in the world. So business users have great expectations about your application. There's very little tolerance for training. Somebody did a study and users would take 3 seconds to accept an application before they moved on to the next application. Of course, they can't do that with business applications, but that's an app that you download, you test it for 3 seconds, and if you don't like it, you throw it away. So, and then short attention span with a mobile device, you're holding something and maybe moving, maybe walking around, maybe doing something else. So the amount of time you have for a task is very short. And then tap and swipe is very different now with mobile than key input or mouse input. And then we've got the orientation change, which you don't really have with a desktop device. So this all impacts UI design. And it might be that you're designing your applications for only desktop, so they will not ever be displayed or accessed using a mobile device, but it's still, users are used to mobile devices. So you have to kind of pay attention to what mobile devices designer is doing so you can incorporate those kind of principles. So that's kind of what we're here for. The first thing is to look at the the design principles. And this is something that I derived from various sources. There were a lot of different people chiming in about what they thought the best things to focus on were. And I kind of pulled those all together and kind of molded them into 3 basic principles. And then there's people that have done standards, and we'll see a couple of examples of that, and then dig into one which is one that Oracle's using. And then the developer resources at the end, I'll go through fairly quickly. And as was mentioned, there is a recording of this, so you can go back to it later and check out the links that I'm going to show you, but we won't spend a lot of time on the links. But it's extra information that you can use when you're trying to incorporate these principles on your own. So starting with the 3 design principles. So main challenge with mobile device, you probably guessed it, which is the display size variance. When we were doing desktop only, we had a difference between monitor sizes. So we could display, 800 by 600 or 1024 by 768 pixels or beyond that. And there were very few possibilities. But with mobile devices, this is a study that was done by James Lance, who's an IBM guy back 9 years ago, who put together kind of a nice white paper, and I gave the link down below. It's worth reading about, because he talks about displays and mobile user interfaces. But he did a little chart, a little graph that you see here that shows the difference between different technologies, smartphones and tablets and netbooks and laptops, and the size variances between all of those. Now, that, of course, this is 9 years ago, so things were quite different then. But the point is that there's a radical difference in the sizes. So you can get from very small smartphones to very large laptops, or very large smartphones that fold out now, and small laptops or small tablets. So the problem is that you've got people reading these applications and your user interface through devices that are very different sizes. That's really the big thing. The other thing is that the orientation can shift. So you're holding something in your hand and you can turn it 90 degrees from portrait to landscape or landscape to portrait and get a different picture. So mobile phone, if this is Amazon, sample Amazon screen showing it in landscape mode, and if you turn it and the display doesn't reform itself, everything gets very, very small. You see more vertically, but it's very, very small and it's hard to read. Now, Amazon doesn't do that, but it's an example of if your application didn't incorporate the size changes. So, like I said, I did this research and I started with 20 principles. There were 20 different things that you had to remember and figure out, kind of incorporate when you were doing mobile design. And then I thought, well, gee, let's keep looking. And I found a place that said, well, there's really only 10. Okay, so I said, well, those 10 actually incorporate some of the things that were in those 20, but they've collapsed them into 10. So I said, let's see if we can collapse it further. And I got down to 3. So we're going to look at these 3. And each one has multiple facets. So, you could go back to the 20 if you want, but there's 3 basic categories. I think we can call it categories. So for design for mobile first is number 1, visual, not textual, and simple navigation. These are the 3 things to remember. If there's nothing else that you remember when you're doing your design, these are the 3 things. So design for mobile first is kind of something I mentioned. You're working with an application or designing an application that may only be for desktop, but you're still going to be designing it as if it was being used on a mobile device. And the point of that is that users are accustomed to mobile devices, so they would be accustomed to how your user interface works. And also, it may be that your application does go out to a mobile device at some point. So the things you think about and you deal with design for mobile first are using modern components. The tool sets that we have now, Jet, ADF, Max, and Visual Builder Studio, all have components that are taking mobile devices into account. So they're gesture aware, they're orientation aware. They have what's called a responsive design, which means when you do the orientation change or you change the size of the width of the screen, the objects on the screen will fold or resize to accommodate. And this is something that we didn't really have. Well, we certainly didn't have it in character mode, and we didn't really have it easily in client server. On web interfaces, we kind of had it, but the responsive folding didn't really happen. And if you're doing mobile only, you can incorporate some of the services that are embedded into the device, like camera, GPS contacts, and then do social collaboration, instant messaging, texting, things like that. Oh, demo. All right, so now we're going to try to go out to a demo, and I have to exit the presentation mode to do that, and then go into another place where I'm getting to my browser, which is here. And then now, do we see my browser?
Yes.
All right, so that worked. So this is an application that Oracle's developed, and it's a good kind of showcase for some of the principles. So I'm going to be going back and forth to this a little bit. Hopefully it'll be a little more seamless next time. It's called the Work Better application, and I'll give you the link. It's live on Oracle's website now, so I'll give you the link for this in a later slide so you can go out and play with it too. So the objective of this is to use, first of all, use mounting components. So if I make the screen narrower, which would be if I'm moving from landscape to portrait, you can see the boxes reposition themselves. And if you go down to a very narrow device like you would have for a smartphone, then it forms boxes that are all on top of one another. And the borders kind of disappear and you get a kind of a different display. But the reason that happens is because the components are doing that for you. You don't have to program that yourself. So that's one thing. The other thing is to focus on the mobile aware things or mobile only things. And in this case, if you go into the people area, you have buttons or icons for things like email and org chart. And there's also a place where you can go to look at a person and get to a phone number. And if you click on these, the application doesn't have these yet, but if you click on these, what should happen is that the application should dial or email the person's whatever their contact is. In this case, there's an email. So that link does work. So the application would go out to whatever service is on the mobile device to do that thing. Like if it's a phone number and this is a phone, it's being displayed on a phone, then it would telephone that person. So that's really the mobile first part of this. And tips, I'm not going to go into presentation mode. I'll just show the slide here. So a couple tips on this. Using design patterns is helpful. I'll talk about Oracle Alta UI as a standard later on, but they have proposed suggested skins and icons and colors. So starting with those is helpful because it gives you a place that you don't have to spend a lot of time on design. You can just use their suggestions. And then, of course, testing on the narrowest width device. This has always been a kind of one of the things that we talk about or that we think about when we're doing any user interface design. We go to the lowest common denominator. So you want to be sure that whatever device you're displaying your application on can show everything visibly, easily, and I guess so that orientation changes don't affect readability, basically. Tiles moving with the width change, so you get the responsive thing happening, and then resizing containers automatically. Oh, the other thing is no horizontal scrolling. It's you can swipe left and right, but it's easier to have the application, easier for the user to have the application only scroll horizontally. And this is something, of course, we came into understanding with when we got into the web, because horizontal scrolling is usually something that's avoided too in the web.
Sorry, just want to be sure that you still showing the browser, correct?
Still showing the browser. Okay, so
Yeah.
what I'm going to do is I'll show the tips slide now. Thank you. Okay, now you can see the slide, right?
Yeah, perfectly now.
Okay, thank you. There has to be a little interactivity to get back and forth between these two things here. Okay, so anyway, so this is the slide about the design patterns and then testing on the narrowest device. All right, next principle is visual, not textual. And this means that what you're displaying is not just text, that you're giving information based on colors, based on shapes, based on patterns, and also trying to simplify things. So the key thing is to have flat lines or flat design without lots of curves to make boxes and shapes, like your tab type components would be made up of a box instead of a angled and cornered pieces. So few gradients or shadows. Emphasizing important content is important. So the thing that the screen should be focused on would appear in the upper left if you're reading left to right, and using saturated colors for competition with ambient light, because the device might be used outdoors. And color, having bold colors and color to highlight important data, big icons and buttons, large fonts, and using graphs, but don't overuse. You can have too many graphs. So let's go back to the demo app and see if we can see a couple of examples of that. Good video that work better. Okay, so are we looking at the browser now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this is an example of visual, not textual. We're seeing the graphs and the numbers. For example, in this My Organization area, we're seeing some numbers attached to these icons, which normally would just be a bunch of text with digits after them. So the user would get used to seeing, looking right away for a particular icon, and then the number would be probably easier to read. And then something like this chart down below, which has the pie chart, which has the mouse hover stuff going on. You see details about it when you hover the mouse, but if you're just looking at the chart, that the colors might indicate something to you automatically without you having to do that. So in this case, color and having a graph would give you information that normally would just be textual. This My Org Activities thing here is giving you different numbers in different colors, which might actually indicate, the color actually might indicate the number, or the range of numbers anyway. And in this case, we've got kind of different colors of green for different different numbers, but the number, as the numbers grow, the shade of green grows. So you don't necessarily have to look at the numbers to see that there's a difference in the intensity or in the size. Okay, so that's kind of the idea there. And again, we're seeing very bold colors and square boxes, not really a lot of curved lines except in the graphs and in the charts. Okay, all right, we're going to switch now back to the slides. Okay, third principle, simple navigation. So it has to be easy to return to the opening page or to any page that you've been to, you can use breadcrumbs, you can use links back and forth to content. Having 2-minute tasks is kind of a goal, but it's not not always possible. But the short attention span means that you've got to try to design your application so that users can get to what they need to do pretty quickly and complete something quickly. Summarizing essential data, drilling down to details. And if you have a menu system, like a pull-down menu system, it turns out having more than 2 levels makes it harder for the user to get to the items, because they have to go click, or tap, or however they get to it, swipe, more than 2 times. Scrolling vertically only, we talked about that, and then have alternative views for the same data. So it might be that it's easier to see, for some users, it's easier to see data in one way, and other users need to see data in a different way. So you provide both ways to see data. Data entry using lists if possible. So so users don't have to enter text. They can just pull from a list, and we've used that I think throughout really all the user interface paradigms. So it really helps with data validity as well. You only have a certain number of choices. All right, so we're going to stop this and go back to the demo. I'm just trying to get a little better with getting back and forth. Okay, so now we're seeing the screen, the browser, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. All right, so this is for the navigation. There's a number of different navigation methods here. One being the box or the tabs up on top. So dashboard is what we see now. People gives you a list of people, all people. And if you look at, this is what they call the card view. This is what they call the list view. And if you go to the card view, there's a smaller box for each person with big numbers and giving their essential data inside the box. And then if you drill into a person, or drill in being click on a person, or if you're on mobile thing, you would tap, you have more detail about that person. So you see their team, which is what's just displayed now. Compensation, there's some graphs and charts for that, and performance over time, whatever measurements these things are. And then just the basic details about that person with their skill set, in a bubble thing here. And location, there would be a map here showing their location. So the address is here, but you can actually see it on a map as well. And then all the contact information. And if you notice, something like the screen that we're looking at would probably be, in earlier technologies, it would be a lot more text, right? So this is also an example of the visual, not textual. So we're seeing, an icon for telephone number and mobile number and email, whereas if we just were using a client server system or something, we probably have the prompt phone number or landline and mobile and email, those words instead of these icons. But people kind of understand what these mean now, so you don't have to have the actual words. So navigation being seeing different views of the person, list or card, and being able to drill in and seeing details about that person, and then also being able to navigate down or up to their manager just by clicking on the icon, the picture icon. And then there's always the profile and preferences type pull down, another navigation technique. And there's no breadcrumbs in this one because there's not really a big type of page or long type of page flow, but there would normally be some kind of breadcrumbs if you're selecting multiple screens and you want to get back. But this does allow you to get back to the page that you were on before, the earlier page, pretty quickly by clicking on the tab or the sub tab, I guess is what you'd call these. The other piece of search, which I'll show a slide on in a second, is a piece of navigation is search. So search being, let's say there's hundreds of employees, but you know there's a name that starts with SHE, and then it narrows it down as you're doing the typing. It's an auto reducing type thing, so you can find the one that you want. So that's an alternative to having a pull-down list. You're actually typing, user is typing. Okay, so that's kind of the idea for that. Go back to slides. Okay, so back to slide. Right, so your goal is to have a single field search where the user can just type anything in and then get the applicable results for whatever, whatever they're looking for, whatever you can envision that they're looking for, like Google. So single field, and then possibly input by voice, if you can arrange that. That's something people would probably expect for a mobile device. Selecting criteria from lists, if you've got something that's applicable to that, or just do the auto completion like we did in that previous example. Okay, some standards. Let's talk about standards. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to try going back to the slideshow here. But you're still looking at my, okay, I have to switch this back to, no.
We can see the agenda at this moment.
You can see the agenda. Okay, so I'll just continue working in this in PowerPoint. I won't display it in the presentation mode. Okay, so this is an application that I worked on around 1998, and it was SQL Forms SQL Forms 4.5 application. The graphics department came up with this design, which was totally unreachable using the components in Forms 4.5. You know, there was this button that's got the little arrow thing on it, and a lot of these graphics and the skin was not possible. You could do the graphic thing because you could embed graphics, but the general design was not something that we could do. So like this table component, you couldn't skin it that way. Now you can these days. You can have CSS and do all sorts of things with forms, but back in those days, this wasn't possible. So we had to kind of, I'm not going to say battle with, but I'm going to say negotiate with the graphics department to come up with something that was close to this that we could actually do. Another application that I worked on, the customer came up with this design, and they did it in Microsoft Access, and then they said, let's do this in Forms. And we thought, we didn't say like what we thought, which was, this is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. But we said, well, we have to kind of compromise because this isn't something that we could do, or actually we wanted to do in Forms. The point of these two, and that was about the same era, because the point of that was there were really no standards at that point. So what we did was we got books. So here's some books that we got. One was The Secrets of Effective GUI Design. And this was because nobody had ever really thought about GUI design before. And this was back in the days of OS2, so you can kind of understand how old that was. And then we had these two books. One is Web Pages That Suck, and the other one's Son of Web Pages That Suck. And the idea here was you learn good design by looking at bad design, and learn how to do your website design that way. So these were attempts at trying to make some kind of a standard. Then Oracle came up with this standard called Alta UI, which was released at Oracle Open World 2014. And they developed it for their cloud applications, used to be called Fusion applications. And it's part of the user experience effort, which is a fairly large department in Oracle now, because they're focused on how their applications are built and what the user experience should be for users of their applications. So these are the links to get to that. And we'll look at a couple of the screens. The standards and the everything that they use to develop their cloud applications are online and available for you to browse. So when you go to their homepage, you basically see an example of this kind of lightweight mobile standard that they've developed, which is very, very clean, not a lot of bold colors, large fonts, and not a lot of a lot of data. It's very clean. So there's links for gallery, demo, tips, and visual, and we'll look at each of these areas real quick. Gallery is kind of a cookbook type thing where you can look at various categories of screens that you might be developing. You see these on the left, like if you're developing a dialogue, you click here and you'll get little design samples for what they've figured out should be a good starting point for dialogues. And the same thing like homepage, master detail. So these are all sample designs. Oh, and there's browser or mobile versions of these. So you can see what the pattern is for each of those. And then the demo is obviously the thing we just looked at, not with click to add title, but that was the thing that we just looked at basically. And the link in the AltUI website is broken to get to the demo. So I'll tell you how to get to that. There's a little secret. Tips, just talking about, these are things you read basically to understand where they're coming from as far as designing for mobile. And one of the things they say is design for mobile first. So that's one of the things that forms one of the three categories that I came up with. And then utilize modern layout approaches, which is more into their patterns, the design patterns. Visual content, and again, this is just a text that you would read, but it talks about how colors and fonts and icons can help simplify things and make it easier to read. And they give examples of all that too. So if you want to look at the overall user experience website, this is the link. And they have a page where they go through 4 things, which is just learning their strategy and then looking at examples. And then they also have a set of rapid development kits. They call them RDKs, which there's one for ADF, and they say there's one coming for JET, which is the Java Extension Toolkit. And they include sample components and sample designs with that particular technology, whatever it is. And then wireframe templates, which you can use to make storyboards for your screens. So you can put together, things to show customers and clients pretty quickly that will be actually renderable, that you can use as opposed to having a wood grain background thing. You can actually use the designs you're creating in these wireframes to implement the components. And then talking about user feedback using usability labs. So they're using it for their cloud apps, but you can use these examples in this technology as well. Oracle Redwood is kind of the evolution of the next version of Oracle UX. It's not really out there in a big way yet, although if you've gone to Oracle's website since last fall, which I assume you have, you'll see that it changed from the standard red and black to these kind of a more different look and feel. The Asian, African, Aboriginal art is what it's based on. So they released this in a big way last Oracle Open World last fall, and they are coming up with a way that you interact with the application that uses machine learning to figure out what page flow you're going to be using. Instead of having a standard page flow or something that's pre-built, the machine learns how you work and figures out how best to interact with you. So it's kind of like you're teaching the machine as you work. So this is all explained in this, well, all of it, as much as is out there in these links, and you can go out and look at that to see where they're coming from. But we haven't gotten too much more than this at this point. We're still waiting, although they're starting to use it for their cloud apps. So we'll see it more now in the applications, and then hopefully we'll get something like we got with Alta UI. Okay, so some resources. The standards really that I showed you are just really from Oracle, but there's some things that you can use, and in particular technologies, depending on what tool set you're using. So the most important tip is use modern components, right? Because the technologies, the developer paradigms like ADF, Jet, Max, and Visual Basic or Visual Builder Studio all have the mobile awareness built into them. So if you use the components, you'll get that. So this, again, back to the same example. This is the example of how you use modern components to change the screen, and when the display gets narrower, it reshapes itself. If you're just using HTML and CSS, I found this particular property is the one you use to do this folding type thing. We won't do the demo because it's really, you just narrow the width of the display, and it stacks the boxes. But the thing that does that is this particular thing, and it's not anything magical. It's out there, but I put it here just because it's something if you're just using HTML. If you're using Jet, the Work Better demo that I was giving it a display for, this is the link that's on the AltUI website, but you have to change Jet to Jet-620 to make it work because this one's broken at the moment. There's another application called Fixit, which is out there, and you can look at this website to find the emulator. It's actually a mobile emulator that you look at this thing in. So that's another example. If you're using Apex, you use the universal theme, and that has the AltUI techniques built into it. So and then when we get to Apex 20.1, if it's there, it might be there already. It aligns with the Redwood design. So you're still having mobile awareness but if you use the universal theme, you'll get it automatically. So you go to apex.oracle.com/UT for that one. And then Shai Smeltzer, who just did a session just now, just before this one, and is doing some others. I call him Oracle Guru Extraordinaire. He gives us a lot of information about a lot of things, but Alta UI, he has an Alta UI with ADF demos and blogs you can look at. If you're using ADF, go out and take a look at his examples. Google has a website that you can read about mobile user interface design as well. And that's this link here. And then if you're using the Chrome browser, you can access the emulator, the device emulator, which is in the menu, more tools, developer tools. And then when you get there, you click on the toggle device toolbar, which gives you this display, and you get the JavaScript and HTML on the right, but you also get in the DOM, but you also get the pull down on the left, which lets you pick a different type of mobile device and see what it would look like here. And then you can switch the orientation from portrait to landscape using the button. So your application, you can test your application immediately on a mobile device, even though you're working in a browser. Okay, so we're ending with this quote by Ted Turner. To be happy in this world, first you need a cell phone, and then you need an airplane, then you're truly wireless. And I guess if you're truly wireless, that means you're mobile aware. You're doing mobile UI design. So summary is mobile apps have raised the bar for UI design. So if you're designing any type of business application, even if you're not deploying on a mobile device, you need to think about mobile design because users are used to that these days outside work. So top 3 principles: design for mobile first, visual not textual, and simple navigation and display. So if you start with pre-built proven patterns like AltUI, you'll have a good head start. You'll be a long ways along in getting towards what's needed. And using modern components, can't emphasize that enough, because they all contain the mobile awareness. And test using multiple devices, very important to be sure your application works on different devices, and the ones that particularly that you know that your application will be displayed on. Google Emulator helps in the Chrome browser with that, with different devices if you know what they are. So that's pretty much it. Here's the thank you for attending, and these are the books I've co-authored, and I guess we can see if there's any questions.
Hi, Peter. At the moment, I don't see any question coming from the Q&A, but
Okay,
that's not a problem because this session will be available for playback for a couple weeks. That
right.
means the people, if they after watch the session, they have any questions, they can basically post the questions on the playback dedicated page for the session, and you will
Right.
be receiving notifications. Of course, you will be able to reply at your earliest convenience.
Okay, great. That's a good way too. If somebody wants to look at some of those links, they can replay the presentation and get back to the links.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
Thank you so
very good.
much.
Okay,
Have
thank
a
you.
wonderful evening, and thank you so much for a great presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.